Good afternoon. I feel extremely glad to welcome everyone to this webinar. Honorable Chairperson for KCHR, Professor K. Ganesh, Honorable Director, Professor Dinesh Vadakinil, respected speaker, Dr. George Varghese, distinguished scholars, and my colleagues. Today, we have a wonderful academic session by Dr. George Varghese on the topic Deleuze, Guattari, and Marx, exploring dialectics and difference as two philosophical procedures towards the arraignment of capitalism. Dr. George Varghese was former faculty at the Manipal Center for Philosophy and Humanities of the Manipal Academy of Higher Education. He is presently the president of the Deleuze and Guattari Studies in India Collective. His research mainly centers around the anthropology of gold, Vishwakarma community, and the Syrian Christians of Kerala, on which he has published papers as well as book in Malayalam titled Swarna Keralam in 2006. He has also published papers on Marxism, interdisciplinarity, and the philosophy of social and human sciences. His other major research interest is continental philosophy, especially that of Deleuze and Guattari. He has also edited several books on Deleuze and Guattari, with special emphasis on India. After the completion of this event, I'm sure that we all will feel enriched with knowledge on this particular topic. For the easy functioning of the event, the audience are requested to keep their microphone on mute during the entire session. At the end of the event, we will have a question and answer session. The questions can be typed on the chat box. We will read them out for the convenience of the speaker. If you still have any concerns on typing, you can ask the questions directly. For this purpose, you can use raise hand option. We will read your name accordingly, and you can ask the questions directly. Once again, I'm glad to welcome you all for this webinar. I invite Professor Dinesh Vadakinil to take over the session. Thank you.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Sir. Thank you very much, Dr. Sashia, and thank you very much, Dr. George Varghese, for graciously accepting our KCHR's invitation to speak on the conceptual framework of Deleuze, Guattari, and Marx, particularly in their exploration of capitalism. And this lecture actually marks the beginning of a series of lectures dedicated to introducing the key contributors of major social theorists and their influence on social science thought, which KCHR is planning right now. As the inaugural lecture, today's discussion will serve as an invitation to explore the pivotal concepts of dialectics and difference, engaging with how Deleuze and Guattari have critically intersected with the works of Hegel, Marx, and Althusser. This session aims to offer an introduction, or rather an invitation to think alongside those influential thinkers. The actual lectures that Dr. Varghese planned has three parts actually. Today he will be concentrating on its first part. As you know, this is a very, very specialized lecture. Therefore, we encourage active participation from our attendees through thought-provoking questions, dynamic discussions, and constructive feedbacks. It's an honor and privilege to welcome Dr. George Varghese, and with great anticipation, I now invite him to begin his lectures. Thank you very much.
I can start, right?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Dinesh, and also the Professor K. Ganesh, Fausia, who introduced me. Thank you, all of you. and let me register my sincere gratitude for giving me this opportunity to give this lecture, especially on one of my favorite philosophers, Deleuze, Guattari, and Marx. As an introduction, I must put it straight that this is the first part of a three-part lecture on the relation between Marx and Deleuze and Guattari. And such a logic is followed. That is also, it has a historical progression in that sense in relation to their works, first of all. Because Marx is first introduced in a very important manner by Deleuze's individual work, Difference and Repetition, in a part where he was discussing about what we call multiplicity or ideas. And that part is what I'm going to focus today. Then, of course, then joining with Guattari, their important work, Anti-Oedipus, that is published in 1972. In that work, Marx looms in much more grandeur or in much more detail, where his influence was more palpable because their ideas of desiring production and also the three phases of historical phases, primitive society, despotic society, and capitalism, that also has strong influence from Marx. And again, in their schizoanalysis, the idea they developed in that against psychoanalysis, Marx's ideas of production becomes very important, and that's actually the book in which Marx looms much more importantly in a positive manner. In the third part, that is their last important work, that's Thousand Platos, Marx, of course, comes in, of course, in some part very positively, but there also has some serious criticism about this notion of contradiction, ideology, based superstructure logic. And this criticism, Deleuze and Guattari level against from their own development of a new concept, that is assemblage. That assemblage becomes straight away critical of what Marx developed as ideology or ideology-based infrastructure relation. So that is the part maybe more interesting, the third part, in which how Guattari and Deleuze veers away in a very concrete manner from Deleuze's concept, Marx's social concepts, and develop their own interesting new concepts. In the first part, here what I am trying today, this is more focused on the difference in repetition, where Deleuze, it's an individual book by Deleuze, where Deleuze is speaking about his very important idea called multiplicity or idea. And as an illustration, he's dealing with three important multiplicities or ideas, and in which the third one, which we call the social idea, that part deals with Marx. And that is what today I will be concentrating. As an introduction, again, I have to say that difference in repetition deals with Marx in two important points. One is as an illustration of what repetition means. In that particular discussion, Deleuze is referring to Marx's very important observation in 18 Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, that history repeats twice, first as tragedy and then as a farce. This important observation by Deleuze is very importantly focused by Deleuze in that first part. In the second part, which is dealing with multiplicities or ideas. He's speaking about three important ideas. And the third one, the first one is about physical idea. The second one is about biological idea. And the third one is about social idea. And social idea is being illustrated with a discussion on Marx, especially as Marx dealt with by Althusser, especially from his structural interpretation angle. So, and that is where Marx comes very concretely, and that is what we will be focusing on. So what was actually Althusser's contention? We will come to multiplicity or idea later. And so first we will see what Althusser has to say about Marxism and why Deleuze was interested in Althusser's analysis very specifically. Althusser was of course, made very important contribution in the branch of what we call structural Marxism. And structural Marxism, in fact, developed by him, was influenced, of course, by the linguistic model or linguistic structuralism, which has a theory which is developed on diacritical opposition in a linguistic system, as well as, more importantly, the synchronic aspect, where the history or time doesn't loom much importantly. Till then, Marxism, of course, had a more prominent analysis, or the dominant form of Marxist analysis was always historical materialism, dialectical materialism, of course, in a more historical parlance or a more historical structure, which was very seriously influenced or very significantly influenced by Hegel. So historical materialism was the dominant, very dominant current till then. In the 60s, when Althusser questioned that, it was the dominant form of Marxist interpretation. And that goes back to Hegel. The Hegel's influence was very palpable in that. And definitely we know that, though Marx was very critical in some aspect about Hegel and his own theory of dialectical materialism is directly drawn from him. And then the second edition of Capital in 1873, in the afterword, Marx observes that. Two things he observes, that my dialectics is different from Hegel's, but at the same time, Hegel, I am a humble pupil of Hegel, and he's my master, or the first person to give a proper shape or proper presentation of dialectics. And I'm so much indebted to that. But there is a mystical shell that is covering over Hegel's dialectic and the rational kernel that is being obscured within that has to be abstracted. And my job is actually to extract the rational kernel from the mystical shell of what Hegel worked out as the great historical dialectic. And of course, it was not Marx. Marx, we can say, as a left Hegelian. In fact, he was a left Hegelian, very influenced by Hegel, but not only Hegel, but not only Marx. All his very important followers were also Hegelians in that sense. Take a case of Engels, then Lenin, Plekhanov, and when you come to 20th century, you have got Lukács, Marquis, Gramsci, and of very late now, though not a Marxist, Zizek, Slavoj Zizek. He has come out with a very important work on Hegel. And again, we have to see that Hegel was in post-war France, post-Second World War France, it came up into the French intellectual scene like a lightning, it was a conflagration, in fact, and that was introduced by a very great thinker or very great philosopher interpreter by name Alexandre Kouchev. Then other very important intellectual, Jean Hippolyte. And Hegel, of course, came to France very late, but influenced many thinkers very seriously. One among them, that is Jacques Lacan and very importantly, and then a host of other philosophers. We are leaving Frankfurt School and Marcuse by the side. Of course, they are also there. So Hegelian influence was so great till 60s. So the Hegelian Marxism was ruling the roost. And it's at that time that, Althusser, who was influenced by structuralism, and in a major way. By that time, structuralism also entered the French scene or European scene. It's, of course, in the Saussurean model that came to France in an important way and influenced Lacan. So, in fact, Lacan is in a way combined both Hegel and structuralism. That is a very difficult combination, but he tried to do that. Then there's a whole school of structuralism. We need not name each one. Most importantly, Lévi-Strauss. And following Lévi-Strauss, Althusser, was a Marxist, tried this theory of structuralism, and he came out with very important work on Capital, especially his illustrious path-breaking book, Reading Capital for Marx, and so many of that. So in that way, structuralism actually became a major interpretative path in which Marxism was completely revisualized, and that of course structuralism coming from a linguistic root, that is of Saussures interpretation of general course in linguistics. The point of analysis, the point of their focus was again the master text, and that's how, hence the great work Reading Capital. And Althusser's theory was that, important theory was that, leave all this historical kind of Marxist interpretations, like Hegel, all his theory about Geist, historical phases, consciousness, spirit, we have to leave that. And if you look at dialectical materialism through that angle, there is really a problem. And that is not the manner in which Marxism has to be addressed. So he take it very clearly that Marxism is, first of all, a theory. Its historical or its connections with the real historical base or reality comes only secondary. What is important is that how the Reading Capital or Capital as a text is organized in a specific logic or in a specific combination or a specific interaction between the main singularities in the text, which are the concepts, which are its concepts. So Reading Capital has to be read not as a historical document. Every time you refer back to what is that, that is not the way it has to be read. It has to be read within the economy of the great text Capital, which is the magnum opus or the main text about Marxism, and not with historical references as that. Or in other words, the text autonomy becomes very important, and text autonomy becomes important since Marx developed his theory using concepts in the sense that Marx also articulates his theory, not every time speaking about the reality as such, but the conceptual abstractions from reality. And these conceptual abstractions are very important, and they have their own autonomy. So if you look into the conceptual autonomy or conceptual structure like that, most of the concepts he has also borrowed from the old political economy, like concepts like commodity or labor or value. These were already in the political economy of Adam Smith or like Ricardo. Even a concept like labor is very important. Concept labor that was already there in Adam Smith and Ricardo, but with Marx, that concept of labor changes with one addition. That addition is what we call the surplus labor. So surplus labor was something which Marx invented, but with a certain addition or certain change or certain mutation in the old political economy concept. So this mutation which happens to the concept becomes very important in the sense that Marx is not creating absolutely a new conceptual system, but he builds a conceptual system mutating in very important way on the old political economy concepts. And in that way, what we have to look at is how these concepts are articulated within the economy of the text. And so text and its autonomy from the viewpoint of concepts become very important, equally important, or as important as what is, or in what context these concepts emerged also. Or in other words, concepts and its multiplicity has its own independent level, or independent level of evolution, or independent level of unfoldment, uh, in the sense somewhat coeval or somewhat parallel to the real evolution in history in the real human society. So these are at two levels intersecting at certain tangential points, but every time concepts cannot be reduced to or cannot be applied back to reality or test every time. I mean, what is happening? So texts have its own autonomy, its own genealogy, its own discursive genealogy. So that is where it is important. So in that context, he was straight away taking on Hegelian sort of analysis, which was historical, and in the historical in the sense that, and his great ideas about the historical dialectic based mainly on the concepts like contradiction, opposition, negation, transcendence, sublation, and Althusser found this to be not a correct way of understanding the historical legitimacy or the historical logic of Marxism. So, in that sense, he also addressed certain problems within Marxism. Also, is trying to address, or it is implicit there, that Marxist concepts also primarily that is developed in the European context. There is a general assumption that Marxist concepts or Marxist capital becomes applicable only to very advanced Western European societies or very advanced capitalist societies. And one problem with Marxism is that while he's analyzing that, certain other communities or certain other portions of the world are excluded, like Asia or Africa. And to deal with that, he, of course, developed his own concept of Asiatic mode of production as a separate part. But if we follow Althusser's logic, that is not the way to do that. In a sense, the whole conceptual repertoire of maybe of capital or whatever is inside, if we take from a structural position, this is a whole ensemble of concepts that can equally be articulated in a different sense, in a very positive sense in other parts of the society also, because concepts, all these concepts are universal. It is not something specifically tied down to the Western capitalist development alone. These concepts can be, in that way, projected or taken, or the whole system of concepts can be taken up into other societies, and it can be applied there also. There comes the problem of course, an immediate question comes up: how this is possible? That is the point where Deleuze becomes interested in his analysis, or what he called what is the structural analysis or the structural method of Althusser. For Deleuze, what he finds unique or interesting in Althusser's analysis, that this structure actually, or what he speaks about, the conceptual economy or the conceptual economy of the capital, or the structural components which forms a sort of like text or a sort of what do you call an autonomous system. this is very important. And this autonomy, which is in a sort of great extent divorced from the real happenings or the real events in society, or the conceptual autonomy, has a very interesting makeup, a very interesting dynamic. And this interests Deleuze, and he tries to look into that from his idea of what we call multiplicity. And that is where Althus's analysis of Marxism interests Deleuze's philosophy of difference, or Deleuze's, especially with one important concept, which we call multiplicity or idea. So now we have to look into what is the multiplicity or idea for Deleuze. Deleuze says that reality or anything is constituted with two halves. One half is the actual or the actualized half, and the other half is a virtual half, which is constituted of differentials and differences. So what does that mean? He says that any event that occurs or anything that occurs in reality is first of all something that had been already contained or already posited in what he calls the virtual, and which have a diacritical collection of differences. And it's the interaction between these differentials that get actualized when something happens in reality. For a simple example, see, I am trying to step out of this room, or I am trying to take my to stand up and just make a sideway walk. What he says is that behind that concrete step which I take, there are so many differentials already immanent in the step which I am taking. That means there is at least a whole range of possible way in which I can take that step. In the sense that these are all differentials that are unrealized or unactualized potentials, out of which maybe one will be actualized by me. So of course, if I hear suddenly an explosive sound, I may just quickly jump out. Or if somebody is just waving to me and come out, I may step out in a more leisurely manner. Or there are so many choices by which I can step out from my seat to the sideways part. And these possible steps which I can take are not unreal, according to Deleuze. These are all real. These are all possible differentials in the virtual, of which I am realizing only one. So for Deleuze, all these virtual differentials, which are immanent, are not unreal. They're as real as the real path, or the real actual step, or the real actual gesture which I am making. So everything is accompanied by a virtual structure, and that virtual structure is important, very important. And what is that virtual structure? He says that in the virtual, there are only differentials, and only differentials which are unlocalizable, unactualized, which are only potentials, which are independent. And these differentials are actually trying to quantitize as actions, or what we call actualizations. So he says that in the virtual, there are only differentiations, D-I-F-F-E-R-I-N-T there. And in the actualization, the differentiation is just like with a C, differentiation actually. So it's a differentiation logic. So what is virtual is actualized. But again, it's very important to see that what is virtual can be misunderstood, or differentials in the virtual can be misunderstood, which can be misunderstood as potentials or possibles. For Aristotle, it is possible real. So possible means what is realized from the possible will be the exact replica of what is already contained in the possible. But in the case of virtual, it is not like that. The possible is not exactly actualized. Every time it is actualized with a difference, or it is always realized with variance and creativity. So virtual actual relation is something of not possible real, but virtual actual, which has a creativity of variation of its own. Maybe uh, maybe an important observation Deleuze makes, or as an example he gives, maybe we can look into something like a language system, a linguistic system. But he says that a multiplicity is a structure, or ideas are structures also. In that sense, we can take a very easily understandable example, or more easy to understand. That is language. Take a language system. What is a language system? The English language, with its 26 alphabets. This is actually a virtual. That is what we can compare it to what we speak about virtual. It has 26 letters or alphabets, which are a definite set of differentials. And these alphabets are, in fact, differentials. Differentials in the sense that they are each diacritically connected, each structurally opposed to the other. And in themselves, they do not have any value. They do not carry any sort of like importance. But out of that, out of this 26 letters that forms the structure of the English language, we create like all sorts of words, all sorts of meaning, and all sorts of discourses, like in that sense. So virtual actual becomes very clear here. Like now, I mean, the differences in language are virtual differentials, and these differentials put into structure actualize what we call meaningful utterances, meaningful words, or meaning is created out of these differentials, or the language system whose components in themselves have no value or meaning. So a linguistic system as a set of differentials actualize into meaning, words, discourse, etc., etc. So this is a clear illustration. So a structure like languages actually becomes a convenient paradigm for Deleuze to look into what Althusser was saying about the structure of capital, or capital as a structural whole of concepts, and how these concepts were interacting and generating meaning, or theoretical discourses within the autonomy of a text like Capital. So Deleuze says that this is very important. So for Deleuze, Althusser's understanding of capitalism, or reading Capital, or structural analysis is a case of virtual actual, or virtual actual in the sense that when he conceives capital as a set of concepts, or diacritical set of concepts between which they interact, and especially interact in particular kinds of theoretical analysis, that is clearly a case of a virtual set of differentials getting actualized in its different moments. That is why he says that the conceptual structure, or conceptual idea, or conceptual virtual differentials that constitute capital can be taken out and can be applied in any society. And there need not be an Asiatic mode which has a separate theory, or like on Latin America, which should have a separate theory, or a Latin American mode of production. No. I mean, if you have this structural system in its conceptual autonomy, this can be taken to anywhere and can be applied there. And that in that way, like, it can be applied to any society, It is not only something specifically related to Western capitalism alone. So structural analysis or the structural totality gives that leverage or that possibility or that creativity, and that was his his big problem. I mean, the way Deleuze tried to analyze Althusser's reading of Marxism. And now coming back to again back to the question of virtual, because that needs more clarification. Though I said a linguistic structure can be compared to what would we call a structural system of analysis, or which forms the base of the structural system of analysis, it needs more clarification. So how he could posit this structural model of analysis, we have to be very careful that a structural system always is beyond time, or what we call, it is a synchronic system, or and that system doesn't have any history as such, or generating a meaning out of that is something of a synchronic act which doesn't bear the stamp of time. And this becomes very, very important. And how such kind of a synchronic sort of analysis can be used to analyze primarily a theory like Marxism, which is strongly ensconced in history and historical progress, historical contradictions, and which primarily comes out of the Hegelian logic, or the Hegelian notion of history, of contradiction, opposition, negation, and transcendence. So that was a problem, to which Deleuze gives the answer that, I mean, a genesis, actually something that is born, need not be fixed to a temporal axis in that sense. So he says that there can be what we call a static genesis. Genesis, of course, means like something born, and that is put into time. But then how do you say about a genesis that can be static? And that is what Deleuze argues with, along with Althusser, and in that way he vindicates Althusser's notion of synchronic analysis of history, synchronic analysis of capitalism, as he tried to develop through Capital. So what is a static genesis? A static genesis means that we create so many things, meaningful words, meaningful discourses out of, a linguistic system of, or like say in an English language or Malayalam language. But when we create something, when we utter something, we create something, of course, something is born. When I speak in English language, I am generating something. Something actually is born. Something, you can say technically that it is in time, but when I create meaning, when I generate words, these words are generated in such a way that it cannot be posited as a part of a historical, genesis, in the sense that it is not between two actual point of time. Though I generate, there can be technically, a time, a temporality for that, but that is not the way meaning is created, or meaning's great range, or what I create as meaning, whose connotations, whose meanings, or the range of meanings, it cannot be pinned down to any dynamic sort of historical progression, any dynamic genesis. But what happens is a static genesis. So static genesis is what happened within a multiplicity, or when we generate meaning in a linguistic system or language system. It is also a generation. When I speak something, it is also a generation of meaning, or for me, I am giving birth to something in my meaningful utterance. But that kind of an utterance which really has an effect, or really a meaning effect, cannot be pinned down between two actual point of history or actual two temporal points in that sense. So dynamic genesis is different from static genesis, or static genesis is something actually in that sense equally legitimate and logical like dynamic genesis. So in that way, he is defending Althusser's analysis, structural analysis of Marxism. So he says that Marxism need not be understood totally from a historical angle, or even as Marx did, of dialectical materialism, or of the logic of dialectical materialism that, of course, like has as its concrete axis a historical evolution or historical unfoldment. You need not have to have that. You can have something which can be generated as part of its conceptual architecture. Meaning can be, or theoretical meaning or theoretical analysis can be generated by completely limiting within its conceptual structure as a virtual structure, and meaning can be generated which need not have a temporal axis. So dynamic genesis versus static genesis becomes two important concepts on which Deleuze insists. So the historical unfoldment in the Hegelian structure or the Hegelian schemata can be equally challenged with a structural genesis or structural generation of Marxism or theoretical Marxism within the economy of the very economy of text, which is an oppositional whole of concepts, of rational concepts or theoretical concepts, which becomes another important alternative to that. And regarding the virtual, again, there had been some differences, definitely. I mean, from many quarters. And what is this virtual had been again questioned and questioned. So virtual, as we said, is part of an intensive multiplicity, or any reality has an actual part and a virtual part. And how it operates in the practical world becomes very important, or for our understanding more clarity. Let me take one more analysis. Of course, like Deleuze has given many analyses. One important analysis is he draws from embryology, or the hatching of an egg. So as we said, that a virtual half is constituted of differentials which are diacritical, and they interact between themselves, and any actualization is something that forms out of it. And when it's actualized, it definitely doesn't, it's not like a possible real. It is always actualized with a variation. And one important example he gives is about an egg, how an egg is hatched. So when we look at as an embryo, or an egg which contains an embryo and an embryo that is hatched out of it, we find that what is actualized as a chicken, or as or a living being, or what is happening actually within the egg that is actually like creating this living being, they don't have any similarity, in the sense that a chicken that comes out with all its fluffy feathers, or like or its own like a specific characteristic, has nothing to do with the kind of structure that is within an egg. So egg may be given certain temperature for certain days, and this comes out. But what happens within an egg is something has nothing to do with the chicken or the living being that is hatched out of it. What happens within an egg is just differential movements. There are only movements within that. There are movements from one part to the other, then there are foldings, then unfoldings, then an embryo which is born almost like it has to undergo all sorts of like movements. Sometimes like I mean, uh, it lies head down, then it becomes straight. I mean, then it turns left, right, like in all positions. So what is happening in that virtual situation, that of course is the virtual condition in which the embryo is born, embryo is being hatched. It is nothing to do with the actualized chicken or snake or that is coming out of it. So the virtual part, which really works as the force behind the actualized being, has no similarity or no comparison. And it is observed that certain embryos like the turtles, the embryos like turtles, like its head is actually formed in a very early part, very early time. And then after it maturing for a certain weeks, like its head actually turns 360-degree, complete topsy-turvy, 360-degree. And this 360-degree turn, I mean, which happens in an embryo cannot in any sense be, I mean, suffered, or it cannot be actualized or made, or it can be realized by a living being that comes out of it. So the kind of, I mean, the kind of ordeals it undergo as an embryo within the egg is something the actual living being that comes out of it can never execute, never perform. And this actually is the real problem. The virtual egg, which is a colloidal thing with so many zones of intensity, in which so many movements take place, and the actualized living being that comes out of, the organism that comes out of, has absolutely no correlation or no logical connection or no logical semblance. So these are two. And this is what Deleuze says: the virtual out of which the actual is realized is completely different, is completely distinct. And so in that sense, he says that even the earth is a sort of egg in which hundreds of movements are taking place, hundreds of rotations, foldings, these are taking place, and we do not know and how to gauge all that. So it becomes the clear example of how an intensive multiplicity, whose half is virtual and the other half is actual, how these are correlated and how the actualization takes place, and the kind of relation which is completely a disjunctive relation, which doesn't have any sort of like semblance or any logic, I mean, any logical connection, I mean, as far as its physical or textual constitution is concerned. And this is where when Deleuze argues that, I mean, argues that we cannot have such kind of logical continuums or logical schemas which are like completely based on similitude or resemblance. And that is not the proper way to analyze, I mean, happenings, events, forces in earth. This has to be seen from a virtual actual angle, and this virtual actual angle is not very easy to chart. And in that sense, like it needs a new scheme of analysis. And so Althus's Marxism actually like offers him a certain way of understanding this synchronic virtual structure of concepts, the way he reads Capital, and how it could be analyzed and applied, I mean, in a new way, in analyzing society, in understanding Marxism, and in a way to order a new analysis. So I think I will stop this part here. And the second part actually goes to anti-Oedipus, which is a more formidable analysis, because with difference and repetition, Marx says bye to what we call the structure, his concept of structure, And a new concept is developed in anti-Oedipus, which is called machine. That machine, of course, is a concept developed by Guattari, and Guattari is actually the progenitor of that. But under Guattari's influence, Deleuze got influenced, and he tried to distance from structure, and machine becomes the new concept that becomes pivotal in the understanding or analysis of anti-Oedipus. And in that, Marx again looms in a major way. It is a book in which they try a synthesis of Freud and Marx, and in that analysis, Marx again comes a very important way, especially in the analysis of capitalism, and that is a very, very important progression. And maybe, if possible, I'll take that up in the next lecture. Of course, that I'm sure that Deleuze is a little bit confusing. Of course, it's not very simple, and the way I articulate it or I try to express it also can have problems, because it is not a very, very easy or very logically clear scheme of analysis. Of course, it is difficult to understand that, but takes some time. And so, of course, I am no authority on everything about Deleuze, but trying to present to you the seriousness and difficulty, but finally, an analysis which can be of immense advantage also. And that is the kind of attempt I'm trying here. So I will end this part of the lecture here, to be taken up later in the second part. So thank you, everybody, for your patient listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. George Varghese, for an enlightening lecture. We all, I think, thoroughly enjoyed your presentation. I request the attendees to come up with their questions. You can either type your questions on the chat or use the raise hand options if you want to ask questions directly to Dr. George Varghese. For beginning the discussion, I'll try to make one or two small comments or question-like thing, or some kind of clarification which I would like to have from Dr. George Varghese. One thing is related to the idea of the linking Althusser and Deleuze. So, as you rightly pointed out, he's a creative, generative thinker. And whereas when we discuss about Althusser, we know that he is moving away from the simple contradiction kind of argument of whole Marxist truth, that of overdetermination kind of argument. Well, but however, what I felt is that Althusser is more into a kind of understanding reproduction of the existing system continuously, rather than becoming of or the creativity of the structures and so on. So, are there any if there is some difference like that? One scholar, Althusser is more into kind of overdetermination and reproduction of structures, and the other person, Deleuze, is into kind of creative, generative, and interested in understanding the process of becoming. So, is there a real possibility of comparison? Of course, you have made a real comparison as well as critical engagement with Althusser, but I felt that there is something which we can be thought more about that. And I'll add one more thing on that. When comparing or engaging with Althusser and Deleuze, so where is how do we understand the social condition in which they're coming up with their own idea? So one way in which we can understand Althusser is that he is in a way engaging with fascist regime or a kind of political order which was ruling the 1940s, 30s and 40s and early. it's a direct engagement with political order and all. Whereas whereas Deleuze is much more into kind of things happening in the 1960s or so in Europe. If they are coming up with their idea in different socio-economic and political situations, how do we compare or how do we engage with the thinking? These are the two minor observations or doubts which arise in my mind when I was listening to your talk. Thank you very much. And once again, I encourage all the participants to come up with their own questions. Thank you very much.
Dineshan?
Yeah, please.
Thank you for the question. Maybe the second part, how the kind of political commitments between Deleuze and or the comparison between them. Definitely, all of them were part of the Communist Party, French Communist Party at one time. And I'm sure he was a member, Deleuze was a member, but Guattari was surely a member. And they all had, of course, very hopeful about the outcome of a sort of Marxist schema of things or Marxist sort of political resistance. But they were all dampened later by problems in Hungary, then especially the growth of Stalinism and the French Communist Party becoming authoritarian, fascist. And in that sense, he divorced, I think they all came out of the Marxist Party. I mean, and if I understand, even Althusser was, I think, ousted from the party, the French Communist Party. So the intellectuals' relation with the Communist Party and Marxism is problematic. At the same time that Sartre was nowhere near Marxism at that time, converted himself into Marxism at one point of time, became a Maoist, and he wrote Critique of Dialectical Reason. So all such kind of displacements were happening. And again, pointedly, Foucault's student, Alain Badiou, again, a staunch Marxist and for the Maoist version, he was always attacking Deleuze for his political stances. Even he used to create problems in Deleuze's. He formed a group actually to subvert and sabotage his classroom lectures, and there is also, and still I think Badi has not pardoned him for the apolitical stances always Marx took, but he was aligning with a highly vibrant, electrically charged partner. That's Guattari, was a radical revolutionary into so many activities, then to Guattari to other great activists like Antonio Negri, especially Italian Marxists. So the scene is very chaotic. And Althusser, for his part, of course, tried to hold on to Marxism, but of course, as a theory, he held on to Marxism. But as a sort of political remedy or a political solution, I think he was also ambivalent. It was difficult, actually, in such situation. So, and the first question, I think I will answer later. Is it okay?
It's fine.
Yeah.
Professor K.N. Ganesh, our chairperson, would you like to make any comment?
Yeah, I think I will. Dr. John Bobby, I think I know you.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes. I am asking a very stupid question, primarily because in your abstract, you call some people as stupid in that. So I belong to the category of people who are stupid because who try to be Marxist even now. So I hope I will accept.
No. I didn't call stupid. I only said it is stupid on my part. To say that's what is written. It's the other way.
Yes,
okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, my comments are threefold. One is that having read Deleuze, I had a number of disagreements with him, and that is, I don't want to go into all those disagreements. But since you talked about Althusser, I think I'll concentrate on that alone. Primarily because Althusser, I think, his reading Capital, his problem was that he skipped the chapter 1 of Capital Volume 1. I'm talking about Althusser and not Deleuze. But at the same time, Deleuze, in fact, actually picked up on one particular feature of that chapter itself. I'll come to that later. But the chapter 1 seems to be very important because I think that Althusser himself, as has been pointed out by Lucien Save and others, you see, they have misunderstood or probably made a different interpretation of what the chapter actually meant. Because it is true that even Deleuze, in fact, repeats it from Althusser, that Marx was simply quoting from Political Economy of Adam Smith and Ricardo and trying to make use of political economy. In a sense, it is true. But in another sense, there is a question about his relationship with Hegel, which actually is presented in that particular chapter in a peculiar fashion, in what we call the labor theory of value. Now, what I'm trying to come out, labor theory of value, clearly, labor is not presented in the political economy sense at all. In that, instead of that, actually, what he was trying to do was to replace Hegelian Zeitgeist with a very different material concept drawn from actual process which he saw in front of him. So there is a lot of difference between how, for example, Adam Smith and Ricardo, in fact, represented political economy the same way as which has been repeated by Deleuze in his text itself, and then how Marx actually was trying to do this. Because labor was no longer a concept which was related to, a specific process of labor or anything of that kind. It was labor power, and labor power was related to humankind, and therefore it became a universalistic concept immediately. Therefore, the way in which Marx was accused of Eurocentrism, etc., probably in philosophical sense does not hold water in the chapter 1 of Capital Volume 1. That is one. Second thing is that, you see, Deleuze continuously makes a point regarding the question of negativity in Hegel. Now, it is not a question of negation or anything. That he mentions it just like that. He mentions negations, he talks about contradictions, he talks about class also in between. You see, all these things are referred to in Deleuze, but continuously he makes a point of refuting negativity. And this refuting negativity seems to be very important for him throughout. And why is he refuting negativity? That is something which one has to look into. Why exactly he is refuting negativity? He actually calls negativity as something which is peripheral, superficial very often, and something that has something to do with basically with the Aristotelian kind of syllogism, and nothing more than that. Now, what negativity for Hegel was different, that I'm not going into that, and Hegel made a mess of the whole thing. But Marx was trying to put forward negativity in a concrete sense, in the sense of, for example, when he presented labor theory of value and tried to introduce a concept which even Deleuze makes much of, that is alienation. Deleuze makes much of that alienation. He actually was trying to present a very different concept of negativity within the process of labor. Within the process of labor, not something that is outside, something that is not an exteriority. That is not something that is an exteriority. Therefore, I think the way in which negativity was presented by Marx and presented by Hegel were totally different. This is the second point, which I don't think he was trying to refute Hegel, which he stands validated in that, but not what Marx was trying to present as negativity, which he did not actually try to refute at all. In fact, it comes very close to what he himself called as multiplicity. Because what he himself called as multiplicity, the multiple ways in which what he pointed out correctly as virtuality, the multiple, except that there is a difference there. What Deleuze was calling as activize was actually presented as multiplicity by Marx. The whole question of activization was actually presented multiplicity by Marx in the form of what Marx called as concrete labor. Because concrete labor is multiple. Concrete labor is no longer abstract. It cannot be concerned, in fact, reduced to a particular valorized form. Instead of that, it is something very different. It is concrete labor is something that is multiple and variant throughout the world. The same acts, for example, as you yourself pointed out, the way in which embryos are formed, which actually I had read that. Now, when an axe is formed by different, carpenter in different ways, in fact. So the same axe can be actually devised in multiple ways, and the multiple forms of labor is introduced, multiple kind of resources are introduced to it. So the point of multiplicity is presented by Marx in concrete sense, and not in the abstract sense or virtual sense. So I think the way in which you are trying to, in fact, introduce Deleuze as a Marxist, I don't think there is any need for doing that. Why should one present Deleuze as a Marxist at all? Because he criticized capitalism. That is the reason. I don't think there is any need for somebody to be presented as a Marxist, particularly because the way in which two philosophers are looking at the same thing are actually directly contradictory, directly opposite. There are very many ways in which one can point out. You yourself pointed out to static genesis and dynamic genesis. And therefore, this is something which can be clear. And also what you did not mention about repetitions. You see, when you talk about repetitions, the same thing comes in. For example, you have got an inner volitional structure which repeats itself, manifests itself in differentiations, and this manifesting itself in differentiations is very different from what Marx was called as a historical genesis, which is rejected by Deleuze. So how can you compare these two philosophers and trying to share the same portion? They are not sharing anything.
No, I think in some way you have, some sort of misunderstanding about what I was trying to do. So as I said, this is not the whole analysis of, or the relation between Marx and Deleuze. This is the first part. In fact, the first part of Deleuze, first part of Marx's presence in the individual work, which is Difference and Repetition, which was written in 1969. And from
after 1968, May 68.
Exactly.
Precisely at that point.
Exactly.
That is the importance of that text.
But published in 1969, if I'm correct. Yeah. That is the point. Yeah. But where he was dabbling more with structuralism, structure, and such kind of concepts, which was very evident. He analyzes multiplicity or idea structure. From there, he completely, divorces from that problematic, especially under the influence of Guattari. The encounter with Guattari is very important at that time. Guattari was, of course, not a philosopher.
Molecules and machines are already brought up by Guattari.
It's exactly, because he was more a psychoanalyst and a semiotician, and structure is something he wanted to attack, and he replaced structure with the concept called machine. And especially in his important work, Anti-Oedipus papers even, and machine becomes surprisingly very attractive to Deleuze, and it is actually machine that substituted structure, and that is what really attracts.
Yeah,
do a combined work with Guattari.
It's a direct evolution of static genesis.
Exactly. And that resulted in his work of anti-Oedipus coming together. But that was completely an attack on psychoanalysis, and in which Marxism was, of course, to a great extent influential. I told you, he never attacked Marx in that way. I mean, he was never critical about Marx, even in Thousand Platos. But when it comes to his theory of assemblages, he is very critical about on one schemata, that is base and superstructure. That is, there is something called ideology and there is something infrastructure in a reflection mode. And that is not correct. Is it nothing like that? I mean, there is nothing like an idealistic superstructure, which is an inversion of Hegel, in fact. What happens in Hegel? Hegel, it is the idea that descends to the materiality or through occupying the materiality and creating its own contradictions, unfolds in notion or spirit or reason or whatever, like no. And Marx's schemata in that way is exactly an inversion of what Hegel did. There is a base in infrastructure, and all the contradiction is this is in somewhat reflecting superstructure where it is like somewhat like a logicized, and that Deleuze was very attacking. There is nothing called that. That's where he developed the theory of assemblage, about which we have to discuss later. Other than that, and that there is nothing called ideology, and that is where they developed. There are only machines, connections, assemblages, and that they very contrarily try to substantiate in anti-Oedipus, and that I still think it's a very powerful
again
argument.
Althusserian systemic analysis.
Yeah, Althusser, of course, it's only a coincidence.
That is where my problem comes in. Althusserian systemic analysis is not necessarily Marxism.
Yeah, I mean, that is a tangential thing, as I explained very clearly, as we said, about political economy, about Marx's concept. You see that you spoke about labor and all. What was actually the more critical single concept that pivoted everything? That is not labor, but labor power. And labor power, the unrealized labor power, that is the concept. Labor was already in political economy. Ricardo and Smith all spoke about that. But the difference was there is something called a labor power, which is a potential, which is actually a virtual as definitely as Deleuze visualized.
That is where I talked about multiplicity and virtual.
Yeah, exactly. It is unrealized. And as long as that is unrealized, it's only a potential. Even Marx could never say that, okay, this much of labor power can be in that way measured or concretized, or its value can be. No, nobody can do that. That is an open-ended virtual. Who can say that my labor power or the unrealized, the potential or the additional kind of value which I'm creating?
How does Deleuze solve this?
So
he doesn't solve it at all.
As long as that
I'm saying
that
he doesn't solve it at all. That's all I'm
saying. As long as that point.
You continue with other questions. Forget about it.
Yeah.
Forget about me. He doesn't solve it. I'll come to that later. If
exactly.
He doesn't solve it at all.
Labor power or surplus value is not something yet in any way like reduced. Nobody can. I mean, that's like
instead what he does is Deleuze does is to just do something called problem solving. Finally, problem solving has changed. That is coming out with something and coming up with something which is almost trivial.
Exactly.
Anyway, this is my position. Forget about it. You just continue.
No.
Leave it me.
I mean, multiplicity is always problematic, and that is what he said. So he said, no solution is final. I mean, maybe we can. We may be going with,
so, which means you, as a person who is interested in politics, you come to a political nullity, and that is what Deleuze became. That's all I'm saying.
You know that is being many times accused of him. See, like
he is very famous. He became that. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean that is a common accusation. Like no, I mean he never wrote on two things. One is on politics, and the second is religion. Deleuze never wrote on religion. He never wrote on politics.
I'm sorry. Every philosophical position is also a political position.
It can be that can be interpreted in that way also. But
Nietzsche had a political position. Heidegger had one. Even Derrida had one. Everyone had a political position.
Yeah,
he never wanted
to take that, but maybe he has his own reason. I don't know, but despite that,
when you ask forget about me. You just ask other people to answer.
Yeah, okay.
Just leave me alone. Forget about it.
Dr. Kashia,
Oh,
you can
okay,
read
sir.
questions from other attendees.
There are so many questions and comments on the chat box. I will read them out one by one. First comment by Yugang. Yugang has commented or opined that the Marxian contribution to classical political economy in terms of the concept of labor is labor power. And also, it is interesting that the deduction of labor power in Marx is by way of retroactive logic, understanding the exploitation of a potential as the essence of capitalism. And Dr. George Varghese, would you like to
Yeah.
add something?
Can you read that question once more, please?
Okay, it's just a comment or opinion that Yugang, opined by Yugang, that the Marxian contribution to classical political economy in terms of the concept of labor is labor power. And also, it is interesting that the deduction of labor power in Marx is by way of retroactive logic, understanding the exploitation of a political, sorry, an exploitation of a potential as the essence of capitalism.
That is correct. That is correct. I understand. I totally agree. So, is there a question in that? That's a correct observation.
Mm, and Deepak has also commented that, or he has thanked for simplifying the concepts to make the arguments clear. And next by Dhanesh. When we say the virtual is the unrealized real, the potential, it also means that it is unidentified. That means not reduced to an identification. When we see the chicken as the actual and the embryo as the virtual, the issue he finds is that the embryo itself has a dimension of the actual in itself. That is, the actual that we identify and name in a language or a representation medium. So, is it possible to really talk about the virtual, the unidentified, the potential in any of the medium of representation like language, sign, or image? The only way then to talk about the virtual would be to say what it is not.
Yeah. Yeah. Virtual, of course, like in its preliminary sense, as I said, the logic is very clear. Anything actual just materializes out of, a virtual continuum, which, of course, like it has many equivalents, later called intensive spatium, plane of immanence, plane of consistency. Of course, like this virtual itself, like later reborn as many other uh, similar concepts or concepts with almost similar logic. But uh, always there is something presupposed as something like what we call it is not something like what we call something very concrete or like a substructure or something like that. And virtual in that sense is a very difficult thing, and how virtual operates in different context is also different. Maybe in the X case, it may be like that, but the nature of virtual can be different, maybe in another context. For example, like uh, uh, an example like Delanda gives like a knife. A knife, like when you take it, like it has its own physical properties. It is made of iron or it's made of steel, and all its physical properties can be we can tabulate, we can measure, or we can register. But there is something important as a virtual side. If I make a knife and I just keep it lying somewhere, and if I never use it to cut something, then is that a knife proper? I mean, that is one question. In this case, virtual works in a different way. A knife's function is to cut. If that cutting is never made, it is allowed to lie there. Is it a knife? That is a question. Of course, like a knife can be like, I mean, made in a very artistic manner. It can be a piece of art. Of course, like certain daggers are like piece of arts, like you can do that. But in simple terms, if the knife is never used to cut, uh, there is something of an unrealized virtual behind it. That is what Delanda observes, like giving an example. So virtual is not something like a, I mean, something uniform or something like that. Then it will be very awkward. The way like the virtual actual functions, like it has something to do with, in his later analysis, he says that I mean, virtual, this has to be visualized in terms of assemblages. So virtual is a slightly complicated thing, and it differs case wise. And what kind of importance you or what sort of focus you want to elicit out of that, that is what decides what it finally is. So it is not uniform. It is definitely a theory which it gives, but the nature of the virtual or differentials behind a particular reality can be different.
Next question by Zachariah Wagner. He's starting with similar thoughts. He starts with by following Dhanesh, that he had similar thoughts with the alphabet example. He's not sure whether the letters would be discretized and recognizable until they emerge in the actual. So, with regard to that, how might you distinguish Althusser's overdetermination from Deleuze's scholastic actual or virtual?
Can you read the question once again, please?
Uh, he had he had similar thoughts with the alphabet example. He's not sure the letters would be discretized and recognizable until they emerge in the act. So, with regard to that, how might you distinguish Althusser's overdetermination from Deleuze's scholastic actual or virtual?
No. Yeah. Virtual, of course, like I mean, it's a set of differentials, like something of an immanent set of differentials, like, of which one concrete example, which of course I give as language, or not me, actually, Eugene Holland gives that example. I mean, how it is a sort of paradigmatic example pointing to how a virtual works, and a virtual works, or how a virtual works through something of an actualization whose time is a sort of static genesis, not a dynamic genesis. That is the example which I am giving. So if we ask, is not there a virtual behind like everything, anything, even behind like a letter A or letter C in alphabet, that will be a difficult question. That will be a bad regression. And that will be very difficult. In that sense, everything will have, like, if we take a particular letter like C, so what is the virtual of that letter emerging? Of course, that can be a question. Or the other question asked, like, does not egg also have like something like a virtual? Of course it has. So that sort of a chain can regress. So you can go on finding that. Nobody I mean, stops from that. But what, for facility's sake, we are intervening on certain point to exemplify how a concept like virtual works. That's what I am doing. I mean, you can take any of these examples, like, I mean, any of this, and say that is not a virtual behind that. Of course, like, so please go on like finding that. There should be, there will be. So like that. I mean, so that is what Deleuze says, like anything, I mean, everything is problematic. Everything is in a continuum. There is no end to that. No progression or regression to that. Like you can trace this chain to anywhere. I mean, he gives a very concrete, I mean, one of my friends, like Ian Buchanan, gives an example. Like, see, like a plastic bottle. A plastic bottle is a solution in the sense that you can, I also carry a bottle of water. I mean, you can carry water like which is in earlier times, it is very difficult, but now you can carry water in that. But when it solves one problem, it is creating another problem. Now the problem is the plastic. So what will you do with this plastic bottle? So plastic has not only become a solution, but a problem too. So that will create another problem. So if we say like I mean, virtual, it is a continuum to behind everything you can identify a virtual, but at some point you have to intervene. So there is no final solution. Every solution will generate another problem. That problem will create another problem, like our plastic bottle. It was a solution to water, carrying water, but now it has become an environmental problem. So that is it. So definitely, like his analysis is a continuum. There is no stopping or no finality. That is why for Deleuze, like philosophy is about problematics. It is problem. So any virtual or actualization creates only a problem. And he also says that is what is called a counter-actualization. I mean, that is more important. See, like, like Marxist theory itself. Marxist theory itself, you can say that it was a sort of an actualization. And what was it actualized? It was trying to synthesize two important streams of thought in Western philosophy or Western thought. One is political economy, and that is the Hegelian dialectic. And he actualizes it. He comes with a beautiful theory, revolutionary theory. But that revolutionary theory immediately counter-actualize also, which is the more important point. This is not only actualization, counter-actualize also. So what did that theory counter-actualized? So after Marx counter-actualized and said that political economy is not the correct way of interpreting. And he drew almost all his important economic concepts in political economy. And he also attacked Hegel, I mean, to an extent. Said as an idealist, he was never agreeing with Hegel, though he drew his major concepts from that. And that is what, maybe once you actualize something, drawing from history or drawing from there, you counter-actualize also. So any point of actualization is a counter-actualization also. I come with a new theory today, drawing out important insights from history. The moment I actualize it, I will be completely attacking or completely recalibrating what sort of history or history itself is re-questioned or history itself is re-visualized. And that is actually the problem. It is not actualization. Actualization always comes with counter-actualization. That is why it is a continuum. It's a continuum with one prop head just looking back. So, and for that, you have to really go into Bergson, especially his temporal analysis. That is the problem. So from virtual to actual, from actual to counter-actual, that is a more important part of virtual actual logic.
Next question by Ganesh. Can we talk about an anti-representative philosophy through representative media? Can we talk about the identity of the unidentified? How can we link the structural model of Althusser with Deleuze's paradigm? What is that specific thread we find connecting them, especially in terms of a similarity?
Can you read that question once again? Sorry.
Oh, sure, sir. Sure, sir.
Please.
Can we talk about an anti-representative philosophy through representative media? Can we talk about the identity of the unidentified? Then how can we link the structural model of Althusser with Deleuze's paradigm? What is that specific thread we find connecting them, especially in terms of a similarity?
What is the specific thread connecting?
Connecting them, them, especially in terms of a similarity.
Yeah,
Connecting
this is-
Althusser and Deleuze.
Them means Althusser
oh,
and Deleuze, their paradigm. That is what meant by them.
what is the last part? I mean,
Ah,
what is the
can
relation? What is
the
the relation between?
structure, how can we link the structural model of Althusser with Deleuze's paradigm? What is that specific thread we find connecting them, especially in terms of a similarity?
Yeah, exactly. That's a model question. As I said, like, Deleuze is referring to Althusser only on a specific point where he's analyzing multiplicity, which multiplicity he also names as idea. Of course, it's very different from Platonic idea, the other important concept. So it is at that point. I mean, he's referring to Althusser, uh, and that example is regarding what he called the social idea. And before that, there are two other ideas also he examined. One is biological idea, and the other is the physical idea. The physical idea is regarding, of course, like he analyzes atomism, Epicurus atomism. And this biological idea, I mean, he's analyzing Geoffroy and Hilaire, like a French botanist. And as the third social idea, he's analyzing, Althusser's analysis of, Marxism, especially his analysis of reading Capital, and how he visualizes, reads Capital not as a historical process or a historical phenomenon, how he relies completely on the economy of the text of Capital, and how Marxism is developed in its within its theoretical economy by interconnecting the components in that, which are the concepts, like the alphabets, or like a structural interrelation, or like interprocesses between this concept which create meaning, and how Marxism could be developed as a science without every time referring to reality or contradiction or historical events at a higher level, at the conceptual level, how it could be developed, how it could be can be given new ideas, because like each of the concepts which Marx uses were already developed or drawn from the history of political economy or philosophy or Hegelianism, but he draws all these concepts from other sources, take it into the economy of the text and processes it, or make them interact in a certain manner, and he comes out with his wonderful analysis of Capital, or sorry, that's how like Marx did it, and that is his argument. It is not something connected with the history or contradiction or class war or something like that. The text autonomy, the Marxism as a theory, as a theoretical practice, what he says exactly. A theoretical practice has a completely different autonomy, and that is what attracts, again Deleuze, who want to develop his own theory of virtuality or virtual actual, which is also a repertory of differentials, and between differentials, like there is interaction, and in a certain form of interaction within the differentials in the virtual, the actual is created or get actualized. But what is actualized and what is differential in the virtual has no connection, as we were speaking about eggs getting hatched, or chicken getting hatched out of the egg. I mean, within the egg, the whole reality is different. It's a colloidal mass, some zones of intensity, and as the heat is given to it, movement starts. Like the hatching egg has so many difficult movements within it. The embryo is already like born, already develops, and only after that its orientations change. I mean, sometimes it like inverted, and we all are like that. We all in the womb were what he called larval subjects, which had its own life, and the kind of difficult movement we underwent and suffered when we were in the womb, we do not know, but we had that. And most of the embryo lies like head down. So most of my gestation time, like I myself should have been like lying inverted, then turns again, all sorts of gyrations, movements. And that is why, I mean, Deleuze also like, I mean, says something about the counter-actualization in this instance also. He says that, I mean, we had underwent all these difficult movements within the womb. And that is why we counter-actualize this movement. I mean, once we come out, I mean, certain people do it in the form of dance. So he asks, what is dance movements? A dance movement, a movement in a dance, it is not productive. It doesn't produce anything. We only say that, okay, it is very aesthetic, very graceful to watch. And these movements I mean, what do you mean by these movements which are aesthetic? And I think Deleuze made the observation, these were a sort of amniotic memory, the kind of movements we underwent. I mean, the kind of acrobatics we underwent when we were embryos in the womb, or human embryos also undergo all these movements. And these movements, we are again counter-actualizing. That word is very important. So a dance form is a counter-actualization of the virtual condition in which we were moving in all our movements. And once we are born, and we are looking back, and we are trying to retrieve what he calls an amniotic memory. So it is not a simple thing. I mean, it is not virtual actual, but counter-actualization equally important. So that is actually the problem.
There are some raise hand options. First one by Sujit Paray.
Yes.
Hello, Sujit Paray.
Yeah.
Am I audible now?
Yes.
Hello. Hello.
Thank you. Thank you, Joseph. It's really a kind of a, very articulative and, getting lots of sense about the first part. I mean, related to your lecture. My question is something.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Sujit.
My question is something related to the ways in which this this diacritical lineage that's coming. I mean, that is more visible in Deleuzian theory. For example, in some part of your lecture, you are saying that I'm not going into the Frankfurt school, but there is this Walter Benjamin's idea about dialectical imagination, similar to, and where he was actually talking about. The ways in which historical event that is presented today is actually displaced kind of thing. I mean, it's not actual, but it has this ghostly kind of a zezura moment where it's only a point of interruptions. Or no, that's the ways in which Frankfurt School is actually trying to say about it. So it's a reified, or it's not actual, but no, an element of, though they were not using the word virtual. So in almost all kinds of the theories which are related to, I mean, whether the Hegel or the Marx or the even later Althusser and even Deleuzian point about the movement images, or the kind of differential. So this dialectical or diacritical elements is there. I mean, in a way. So historians most of the time they work. They know that there is this two-dimensional kind of thing is that it's not only static genesis, but there is another aspect of the reality is always connected to the myth. The reality is always connected to the unreal elements. So how you are going to place this Frankfurt School theories about the displaced event? Especially the Benjamin and later Siegfried Kokower, they worked on this idea about the event is actually not actual, because it's somewhat modified, somewhat displaced. It placed in that the temporality absent from that event. So this is what some of the kind of concern when I was listening. Truly I'm waiting for your lecture on the machine. I mean the assemblage question next. Thank you.
Yeah, Sujit, like, thank you for, the interest in this talk, and thank you for your good words. Yeah, I mean, Frankfurt School is something like, frankly, I am not very well versed. Of course, like I read Benjamin or Adorno, like more, of course, like Marcuse in that sense, Reason and Revolution, like or Hegel. Uh, but I mean, I have heard about something called what we call the aura, or some notion of aura. I mean, which has something to do with the virtual, but I am not very concretely competent to comment on that, because since I have not worked on that area, but surely like I will try to answer that. I mean, given some time, maybe in the next lecture. I mean, if you'd be, I mean, kind enough to attend that, and I will surely like try to answer that. Now, of course, like some half digested answer. Of course, I should not like give a scholar like you like now, or maybe like we can on a personal talk. I may be able to. I mean, later. I mean, if you are disposed to, like, I mean, we can talk on that. Yeah. Sorry, I'm really sorry.
Next, raise hand option by Nadeem Malik.
Yeah. Nadeem. Yeah.
Hi,
Hi,
George.
Nadeem.
Can
Nadeem
you
is my Nadeem from Australia, my friend and my PhD supervisor also. Like, he's in Melbourne
Not,
University. Yeah. So
you should,
thank you, Nadeem. Yeah.
no, thanks for the wonderful presentation, and it was really very beneficial for me. So my question is is actually to understand Deleuze from your talk. When you talk about virtuality and counter virtuality, and actuality and counter virtuality, somehow it seems to me, the argument itself seems to me quite spherical. And if that's the case, then how would sort of discuss difference and repetition, where sort of Deleuze developed a thesis against Hegelian spherical argument or dialectics, and where he sort of where he sort of made a case against the present moment, the present, which he thought was too much emphasized before. This is one question. Second is that there is certain recognition by Deleuze of the actual also. Now, actual again now actual means that actual, the way I am understanding, I may be understanding it incorrectly. Actual to me means a certain mode of being, something that exists in the present moment. Again, how it gels with his difference and repetition, where, because according to that, being is something which is perpetually in a state of becoming, and third, my question that I have, which is a minor question, is also that Jean-Paul Sartre also has talked about, multiple possibilities or potentialities, which in Deleuzean term you may call it virtual, not exactly virtual, but potential possibilities for being, for multiple pathways, etc. How would you distinguish that from, Deleuzean multiplicity?
Yeah. Yeah. Regarding, you pointed out very importantly something which Professor Ken Ganesh was also pointing out. Like, I mean, actually, Deleuze's problem was not with Marx in that sense. Like, no, Marx, of course, like, I mean, in that way, like, of course, in the last text, he's completely dismissing this schemata of like substructure ideology. I mean,
Yeah.
or this reflection thesis, which also has the very clear Hegelian stench. Otherwise, he was always thinking Marx as a great thinker, I mean, in that way, and he co-opted his method also. But regarding Hegel, he was very attackive. And he has said, like, I detest, I mean, this kind of, I mean, the
Yes.
whole idealist dialectic schema. And there, like he's taking as his ally, especially Nietzsche. I mean,
Yeah.
Nietzsche's great attack on Hegel, especially in many of his writings, the Speak Zarathustra, like especially like, and which he analyzes in his very important book Nietzschean Philosophy. So Hegel was actually his target always, not Marx, and to an extent, like he always he said also that Marx has in a great way redeemed the theory from the evils of what called the Hegelian sort of like idealist dialectic. And so that was actually his position. And regarding, I mean, his theory, he says that what we call contradiction, more importantly, negation, or negation of negation, it is only a sophistry, a sort of like a sort of like a logical monster. I mean, that's what the way he used. I mean, basically, I mean, Hegel's theory is that a negation of a negation is a returning to the self. So, I mean, everything is within what we call the economy of other, or like he put everything topsy-turvy. I mean, in that sense, for him, say the concept is more important, and the real is only an expression of the concept, or the real that comes out of the concept is what he called untrue. Of course, he has a very, very important argument. Say, like, take the case like a rose, a red rose. A red rose, a concrete, empirical, real rose is something untrue for him. And why he says so? He says that when we say the rose is red, it is untrue. Why? Because according to the concept of rose, rose is not red alone. Rose has a certain shape, rose has a certain smell, it has certain function, and all these are included under what is called the concept of rose. So once you say like rose is red, that is something untrue or deficient. Or take the color red. The red itself, once as the predicate red, say to red is also untrue in the sense that red is not something related to rose alone. Red can be the red of many things. So that is where it's a very tricky position. You can't refute that. How can you refute that? Of course, you know that under the concept of like me, I mean, so many things can be included. So in that way, he's not wrong. But but once you relate it to the real empirical processes, like what he says, or at a higher level, so all history, that is where the danger is. So not an individual rose, but the whole processes that includes this rose, or what happens in history is also a part of a larger concept, or what you call the idea or reason or notion. So everything unfolds according to that, or the whole human history is an unfoldment of spirit towards its end, and whose ultimate function is only to know itself that it has unfolded all through history, or like the important image, the snake with the tail in its mouth. That is where the problem is. So this sort of an idealism is what Deleuze really attacked, or so many people attacked. And coming to negation, so negation is a sophistry in the sense that he says that I mean that negation he takes from Spinoza, like I mean omnis determinatio est negatio. I mean that is what the sentence, like it was not said by I mean Hegel, but it was by Spinoza. He drew out of that. He says that everything can be understood only as a negation, uh, in a static sense as well as in a dynamic sense. In the static sense, he says that without, say, a figure like circle, you cannot understand what is a square, or without a color like red, you cannot understand what is white. I mean, these are all, in a sense, diacritical or oppositional. And for Hegel, these are all negations. And the dynamic negation, there's a static negation, but the dynamic negation comes when it speaks about a subject like me, like, so what is my final self-assurance is my my position established through a negating what is negating me, or my final positioning or returned back to myself through negating another, which in turn negates me. Somebody here is another, he negates me. And when I negate his negation of my negation, that is the return back to myself. And that Deleuze says is a logical monster. I mean, nobody says that negation of a negation should be, a positive affirmation. Because once I negate something, as a second negation, as Nietzsche, I think, said, it can only add to an increased negation. Who said that? That the second negation should be a return to myself? In no way. The negation over a negation or a second negation can intensify that negation. That is what Bergson said. So this is a sophistry. In no sense it means that the second negation should come back to me, unless that a subject is completely like bothered about or completely, obsessed about his identity. Other than that, a negation of negation, the second negation can be only an intensification of a negation. In Malayalam, maybe I think Vaikam Muhammad Bashir just said, "Onnu onnum kutiyal ഒരു വലിയ ഒന്ന് എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞാൽ it cannot be two, it can be a big one also. You add one and one, can be a big one also." Like that, a negation of a negation in no sense means that it should return back as an assurance to the subject. It can be a negation intensified. So that is why he had problem. Of course, there are a lot of problem with his with science of logic, starting with being and nothing, or the third category like becoming. There it is being just opposition to nothing, and being and nothing resolves and comes becoming. But there is a huge gap there. Being and nothing is equal or same. There is in what logic that they should interact and becomes, or what force make them, unless it is a divine force or something. Why should that opposition be resolved, or what force resolves that opposition, which becomes what we call the becoming? Which goes into determinate being, quality, quanta, like that. Science of logic proceeds like that. So there is a fundamental logical error, and that is what Nietzsche and Deleuze were concerned. And that is why they said Hegel is wrong. Hegel's dialectic is a monstrosity, and not Marx. Marx, of course, but at some point he said, in Difference and Repetition, Marx actually saved this dialectic to a certain extent. But even by saying and coming with his own version, that has other problems that we are trying to point out. Maybe in a later lecture, like we'll focus on that. It is not that this Hegelian ballast is too much in Marx, and he could not easily escape that, because the basic structure is that. So that has its own problems. But Hegel was really the villain for him, and that is where the whole problem is a problem. Yeah, Nadeem, what is the second question? I forgot.
No, I think no. I understood what what I was trying to differentiate. I was trying to understand how Deleuzean concept of virtuality and actuality and counter virtuality and actuality actually is different from Hegelian dialectics, because that I know that for him the real and his real adversary was Hegel, not Marx. So that's I understood that.
Yeah, you can say, like, in a way you can analyze his concept or his spirit. It can be a virtual. If you equate with Deleuze, like, you can see that, okay, why not his spirit or concept a virtual, out of which the actual comes out, or the real process, the empirical process, worldly things are created out of this spirit, which is a virtual. Of course, then it becomes somewhat semblant or somewhat similar to Deleuze's virtual. But that is not the way it works. The whole functioning is different. And that is a bigger problem, which we cannot immediately address now. Thank you, Nadeem. Thanks a lot.
Next, we have so many questions by Tanzil Nazar. I will read them one by one. He has asked to recommend a reading for our next session.
Sorry?
he has asked, that is Tansil. Tansil has asked to recommend a reading for our next session.
Reading or
For our
Deleuze?
next session, that is, you have mentioned that we will have 2 or 3 sessions.
Yeah, that of course, like I mean, that is not. I mean, right now I can conclusively say when it is. It made sometimes I mean, elapse because like I will not be in India for some time, but that will happen. Of course, like maybe it might take some time. I had to go back and settle, and of course, like it will. So maybe he can contact, I mean, KCHR. He can write to you, or he can directly write to me. I mean, then later we decide about that. That is okay.
Second question, could you explain the relationship between the actual and the virtual?
Sorry.
Could you explain the relationship between the actual and the virtual? Actual and virtual.
Yeah. That. Yeah. I mean, actual virtual relation is that. I mean, anything or any object are divided into 2 halves. One is a virtual half that is underlying its actual half, and the virtual half is a set of differentials or set of forces, intensities, which in certain forms interact and concretize and get actualized. But the important thing is that from the differentials, when it is actualized, it does not resemble the forces from which it got actualized. It will be different. We were talking about the egg and chicken, like I mean, when an egg hatches, like the whole material structure within an egg is completely different from the chicken that hatches out of it. I mean, maybe you can explain like biologically, or like maybe biochemistry can explain, but in concrete example, as a concrete event, there is no similarity. In that way, it is a wonder, still a mystery. Why from a colloidal egg? I mean, a chicken with fluffy thing, maybe a stupid example, but still, it is a problem raising example. Like, no, you can't. So virtuals are something like a series of forces, differential forces that underlies any concrete thing or concrete, material or immaterial event, and out of which it comes out. And but once it comes out, it is this the what comes out does not resemble from the differentials or virtual from which it comes out. There it is actualized with a creative variation. There's so many examples, like, no, as I said about steps, like see how I am going to step out of this library. There is a series of possibility. I can just jump over. I can take a small step. I mean, somebody just called me, like I may rush out, like, I mean, these are all possibilities. So there are hundreds of possibilities of me, I mean, making the next step, out of which only one will be realized. Maybe you'll think this is a sophistical gimmick, but many a time it appears so. But if we really look into that, really analyze it, that is the fact. There's so many possibility that, I mean, how I take my next step, because under some sort of like extra stimulation or some sort of provocation, I can make different combinations of that. So for all these possible steps I can take are not unreal for Deleuze. They're already immanent in what we call virtual, out of which I will only concretize one step. So that is the simplest possible explanation. And virtual does not mean just taking birth alone. Virtual has so many dimensions, which we will speak later. Like, virtual is a much more complex concept, but what this is a very simplified example for you to understand. So anything is ensconced, any act, physical act is ensconced in sort of so many differential possibilities, which is very real or immanent to it. Yeah, I mean, the example is very clear. Like the next step I can take in different ways. If maybe some dirt is there, I can overstep it, I jump over it. Like, no, I mean, some noise I hear, like I may retract back. There's so many ways, like, and so many possible ways are all an immanent set of differentials or virtual differentials behind that act, out of which only one will be realized. Yeah.
Third question. Do you believe that Althusser's idea of recovering communist politics through Spinoza and Deleuze's and Guattari's inspiration from Spinoza to recover the non-sovereign subjects intersect?
Or, so, I mean,
Shall I read once more?
yeah.
Do you believe that
Hmm.
Althusser's idea of recovering communist politics through Spinoza and Deleuze's and Guattari's inspiration from Spinoza to recover the non-sovereign subject intersect? If so, is it more accurate to say that both were attempting something similar or that they share intense similarities?
Yeah, that is a very long question. That is something I cannot answer right now. I mean, it takes at least like, I mean, so very important question, but it cannot be just answered like that. Like, I mean, I'm really sorry. Uh, Maybe like that friend can have a personal call given to me, or if you can give your phone number or something, I can talk to you. But it cannot be very casually or very very unpreparedly. I cannot answer that because it is about Spinoza, especially a very difficult philosopher, prince of philosophers, like what that's what Deleuze called at his very important work, because Spinoza constitutes one of the basic axes of his differential system. The other being like Nietzsche and Bergson, like no. So there is so much of Spinoza in that. And regarding Althusser, that is also another difficult question. Like no, so correlating them it cannot be like, I cannot do that within the economy of time which I'm given here. Probably I can respond like if he wants to. I can give you. You can collect the phone number from. KCHR me, give me a call, or you give the number. I can call you. Maybe later I'll respond. Sorry. Yeah.
Next question by Mohit.
Yeah.
Has the problematization by Deleuze on the structural totality and bringing out the Althusserian reading of Das Kapital and the virtual or actual has actualized into any political praxis?
Sorry.
Shall I read once again?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Has the problematization by Deleuze on the structural totality and bringing out the Althusserian reading of Das Kapital
Yeah.
and the virtual or actual has actualized into any political praxis?
Not in that sense, because I think there is a misplaced question. Like, no, virtual and actual in Deleuze's case, like that has nothing to do with, politics as such. Politics is, as again I said, something which he was very stingy or very reluctant to address. As I said, he never wrote something on a treatise on religion, which every philosopher usually do, nor on politics, though he of course wrote something like nomadology. But that is nothing about with politics as such, but certain form of civilizational dynamics. That was what nomadology about. Of course, a very important concept, war machine, that was profusely used. One of his very popular concept that is there. But other than that, politics is not something like he was really addressing. And virtual and actual, of course, does not have any political undertones. To directly speaking, of course, like virtual and actual can be applied. With cautiously or carefully. If one wants to specific cases or specific events, one can do an analysis using those concepts, which are a very resourceful concept. But as such, virtual or actual amount to, I mean, or just like correlate to politics is something I'm unable to answer. Might be there, but I mean, I am unable to. I'm not competent to answer that. Right.
Also, Mohit has asked to share your thoughts on the unproduced work of Deleuze on Marx.
Yeah, I mean, that was the grandeur of Marx. That was what he was doing. I do not know, I mean, much, I mean, about, I mean, its details. Like I have really read in somebody else's essay, or mine is, I mean, a second-hand knowledge, not directly. Have never seen the manuscript or not read part of it, but I mean, I came to know that his last works on Marx. Of course, that is very famous. He was trying to work on Marx because he worked on so many individual philosophers, starting with Nietzsche, then Spinoza, I mean, Leibniz, Bergson. I mean, so many of them, like, no. So of his final project, I think the project before was that on Leibniz, that is unfold. He was trying to do that by the time death stole him. I mean, of course, it would have been a very different work. I mean, of course, a wonderful work, like, I mean, original work, like, no. So we are somewhat unlucky to never get hold of that. Yeah.
Next question by Shafi. What would be the nature of virtual in terms of art or aesthetic experience?
Yeah.
What would be the nature of virtual in terms of art or aesthetic experience?
Yeah. I mean, of course, like art is something very, very, I mean, significantly connected with virtual. Like it is really the virtual forces that art is trying to come out, or the virtual or the forces of virtual from which once it is actualized, it get neutralized, it get flattened. But art is always about, I mean, that is his theory also, that to recapture or capture back the original, the virtual forces that really were behind, I mean, behind, like in the formation of the actual. And in that sense, art is a counter-actualization. I was speaking about the dance form. I mean, dance form, like it's a sort of like all those movements which we express were actually movements that we underwent. I mean, the kind of movements we underwent in certain way in the womb as an embryo, like we had all gyrations, all sorts of acrobatics. So those were the forces. So a dance form, a painting is not just a representation, a flat representation, but regarding the virtual forces, especially if you read Francis Bacon, his famous work on, I mean, the great painter, I mean, that book really shows you what is a virtual aura, then concepts like, I mean, abstract machine, diagram, like so many concepts, which is really capturing or trying to capture the virtual forces, the unrealized forces or real intensities. That is more exact. That's a more exact concept. The intensities, the intense virtual forces that is behind the actualization. Actual do not interest. I mean, you cannot do an art like just painting or just or a portraiture is of course not a very good form of art. Like I mean, doesn't fare okay. At one time, maybe in the Renaissance or later Renaissance, portrait painting was a very important. I mean, way of doing it. Even Picasso was a great portrait painter, but from there, like they all deviated. So similitude or similarity, resemblance is not the art, or the resemblance or actual is not what art is about. Art is about the forces, the virtual forces, the unrealized or the formative, creative, virtual forces that worked behind the actual or behind the actualization, concretization of reality. Of course, art has much to do with virtual, not actual. Yeah.
Now it's the time to wind up the session.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you,
Please go ahead.
Dr. George Varghese, for being part of our webinar. Thank you, Professor Dinesh, for chairing the session. Thank
Yeah.
you, Professor K. Ganesh, for being with us. Thank you for the participants for actively taking part in the program. And finally, thank you for the entire KCHR team for supporting me during the coordination of the event.
Yeah, let me also thank all of the listeners, like all of my audience, all the organizers, especially Dr. Dr. Ken Ganesh and Dinesh Mulakani and Ganesh for his excellent, very inciting questions also. Like thank you all. I mean, we'll of course like meet in the future again. Yeah. So bye for the time being. Bye.
There is an announcement regarding our next webinar, which has been scheduled to be held on September 12th by Dr. Digvijay Kumar Singh on the topic Narrating the Coast, Reimagining the Region, Indian Ocean and Malabar. All are welcome. Thank you.